So welcome, Bobby, and anyone else that's listening. Just today is about discipling others, and we're moving into the manual called Discipling Others. And today we want to talk about the core structure. And so the main purpose of today is from what we've written to see if we've written it in a manner that others can understand it. And so this is more of a question time for Bobby or his allowing his point of view on it. But first, let me pray. Father God, I just thank you for today. I thank you for what you are doing in our lives. And thank you for the transformation that you're doing in the lives of many. I pray, Holy Spirit, that you would just lead us and guide us this conversation and help us to be able to explain in clarity the structure and why we wrote Growing Deep and Strong the way we did. Amen. All right, so this basically there, if we'll start off, I think, I'm not quite sure, Bobby. Maybe we just look at the, do you want to we look at the disciples manual. You look at the disciples manual.
Yeah.
And as I said, the purpose of it is we put the introduction. I mean, for those that are listening and never picked up our material, the purpose of why we've written it in the coach's manual and the disciples, but particularly in the coach's manual, we've designed it in a way that anybody could pick it up and start to disciple others, even being a brand new Christian if they had leadership or management skills. Because I clearly see, I don't know when anybody's listening to this other than outside us two right now in April 2024. But in essence, I clearly saw in the spirit many years ago that there's a coming outpouring of God's spirit where people are going to be swept into the kingdom of God by the millions. And that there was a need for a discipleship path. The masses would be so big that in our current structure we would burst at the seams trying to disciple these people. And it was designed in a way that it could be marketplace ministry, that anyone that was running a business and had demonstrated leadership or management skills, they could pick up the coach's manual and start to teach their people. So they could be like two steps apart ahead of the disciple that they were teaching. In other words, their employees or their circle of influence or whatever. So having said that, Bobby, now that you've read that, let's get some feedback from you in the essence of what you understood. And I think you can probably start in page 3, and both the coaches and the disciples manual in this almost are equal pages. So if you want to start there, if you want to, or the outline.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, it goes with the introduction to the Growing Deep and Strong series. And the expectation would be that if you're actually moving into the place where you're going to be coaching someone, that you've been through this yourself before. So you should be familiar with the basic course outline, which talks through laying the foundation. It talks about the fact that there are basic and advanced levels of the course, as we're talking about now. There's going to be some adjustments to make it basic and leadership. But moving through that you're laying the foundation, that you've got the encounter weekend, then you go into module 2, power of godly character, then the other encounter weekend, before moving into the advanced course, which this component is a part of. Yeah. I think it's good. Look, I think the languaging is good, and I think it's important that we're clear on some of the languaging. Is Carl, as you've already said, this is designed that someone can coach people through the discipleship, right? And I think using that word is really important, because when you start talking about teaching, people typically can get quite nervous because they're like, who am I to teach others, right? The beauty of this, if you think in terms of the coach doesn't need all the answers. The coach just needs to be able to ask the right questions and guide the people that are being coached and guided on this journey and point them to the right places. So the beauty of this being that you've got the coach's manuals to support you. We're using the disciples manual to teach you about the coaching, but in every one of the courses you go through that you're helping, you've actually got a coach's manual that allows you to be guided through that whole entire process. And that whole point, a coach is about asking questions to help people focus. It's not about giving people the answers. Fortunately, the material itself is constructed in a way that kind of guides people very prescriptively through passages of scripture, bits and pieces that they actually have to do, and effectively allow people the opportunity to engage. And it's more about encouraging people to share what they've, or what God's been saying to them as they've gone through this, not just ticking a box. Yeah. So I think that's something that can get, as you say, anybody who's done a kind of management, leadership, that kind of stuff should be familiar with all of the basic skills required for that kind of a process.
And then looking at page 5 in either the disciples or the coaches, their course structure. Do you want to talk about your point of view?
Yeah, you've got the series as it can be run as a one-on-one, small groups in a class. I think that's part of the flexibility. I find it interesting. My pastor put online yesterday a comment from Billy Graham. If he had ever not been called to global evangelism and had been called to run a church, he said he would just have concentrated on connecting and working with a group of about 12 people and just following that model of Christ and really pouring into about 12 people and helping them to actually get to the point where they know and they're all walking together strongly. And I think that's this kind of thing is perfect for that, because you can work in small groups, as I said, one-on-one. You can work in groups of 12. You could work in a large classroom kind of scenario or a whole auditorium if you wanted. Provided everybody's working their way through the material, you can guide them through it. But I think it really invites itself to those kind of small group settings where you can have some rich conversations and really engage and involve everybody, so that everybody is walking and learning together and nobody is hiding in the corners, as it were. It talks about the themes. It talks about the key aspects, the time frames. That's one of the good things. All of the sessions have a kind of an annotation of how long it should take somebody to get through. Anybody who's been watching, Carl and I have been working on a kind of week by week basis, which is kind of a really good rhythm that allows you to have the sessions, the conversations, but gives you enough time spread across the week to do the study. I think there's a balance between the speed at which you move through this, have balanced with the time to actually soak it in, the time to do the studies and things like, but that little bit of pressure that I've got to get this done helps maintain and starts building good spiritual discipline, because being a disciple is about being disciplined in actually making time and purposely putting it aside time every week that says, I'm going to be studying during this time. And that, I think, is a really good thing to start reinforcing, because this is about building disciples. And being a disciple is not just about knowing what the Bible says about the different bits and pieces of the gospel. It's also about practicing the disciplines of biblical discipline, right? And that includes the prayer, the studying the Bible, reading the Bible, all of these different types of things.
So in the theme, what did you think about, and there's a bit more in the theme there, but I don't want to put the words into your mouth, the concept of the theme of how we present, how each session or each topic is presented?
Yeah, look, so it talks about the theme. There's 3 formats. It talks about the first format being a verbal presentation. Now, the beauty of the way that this is now set up is you can, as the coach or the group leader, you can actually read the verbal presentation straight out of the coach's manual, or you can play one of the videos that Carl's put together where he's effectively reading it. But you've got a couple of options open to you, which will deliver exactly the same material. So the information that people will get is the same. In order for any of us to grow, our journey of growth is in 3 parts, right? The first part is we have to learn things we do not know. Yeah, there is, whilst you can get divine revelation, you still have to have something that is imparted or taught or instructed to you, or you have read as a way of learning something you didn't know before, right? The second part
So just, sorry, Bobby, just ask the question. with that verbal presentation, what's the concept behind that? What do you believe is the reason why we did that, the concept? And is that just a one-way dialogue, or is that a two-way dialogue?
Well, the initial verbal presentation is effectively a one-way stream of the actual information to make sure that everybody's on the same platform in regard to the topic that they're reviewing from, right? So it's about setting the foundation and helping people go, look, here's what it is, which sets them up for the second part, which is where the disciple themselves goes off and they do the study and they actually work through an in-depth study about what they've been taught. So it's reinforcing, it's allowing them to go, and it's during this time that they'll identify questions and things like that, because it's during the third part, which is when everybody comes back together, there's an opportunity to discuss, just as you and I have done on many of these videos, what has been learned, what they've seen as a result of that, kind of what has come up and how they've navigated through that, to make sure that, one, they've understood the concept and they've got that clear, but two, that anything that they have had stirred up within them, there's an opportunity to discuss that and have an open conversation around that. And again, that's why I think that small group format really works, because people are more likely to build trust and actually engage with one another in a smaller group format than they are in a large auditorium. Right?
And the methodology in there, in the three themes, as a coach yourself, do you think that ticks all the boxes from a coaching point of view, and in the way that you want people to absorb the material or the topic?
Yeah, look, as I say, we've all got to learn something. Yeah, and so a verbal presentation or watching a video or whatever is a good way to get a baseline kind of understanding. But each of us has different ways of processing information. And I think the second phase, where you go into the interactive aspect of that, that to me is where each person is allowed then learn at their own speed. Sorry, somebody's trying to call me. I will just end that call for just now. So the personal discovery component allows each person to spend one-on-one time going through this. And then the beauty is, and I've had to do this, sometimes I'll sit and I'll do that whole study in one sitting. Other times I've got to break that study up into chunks over the week, just as time allows. But the beauty of the study is that the way that it's set up, you can do that. That study time is teaching you to engage with opening a study Bible, looking deeper than just reading the verse, but actually beginning to study the context of the words that were used, why those words were used, where they were used, all of that kind of stuff.
And I think the important thing is, is that for those that haven't picked up the material, when we're talking about the Bible verses in the disciples, they actually have to fill in the missing words of that particular verse, so they can't skim read it. It just shows up because it's a fill-in. All the things are fill-ins, where they got to physically pick up the Bible and fill it in.
Yeah, and I think that's important. There is a physical engagement, and I think I talked about different learning styles. So typically, and whether people acknowledge or understand this or not, we have 5 senses. We know that we have 5 physical senses. Those 5 physical senses are how we receive information. Now, typically for information that we learn, we rely on 3 of those, being what we see, what we hear, and what we feel, what they talk about kinesthetic, or what we interact with, right? The beauty of the first 2 components, you call them themes, I would call them components of our kind of learning style.
Yeah.
The first really hits those that are auditory, because they're going to be listening to it. The second part engages those that are visual and more kinesthetic, because you're both reading it and you're physically engaging it. You have to open the Bible, you have to work through, you have to write out scriptures, You have to kind of fill in bits and pieces. So there's an engagement for lots of different learning styles in this, which is a really good way of looking at it, because this is about creating something that can engage the widest audience possible. And I think that's one of the reasons that these two bits really work. Again, the last component, where we're into that group discussion, well, the other thing you'll find is the other kind of I don't like to use word, but the other kind of way that the humans kind of are grouped is we have introverts and extroverts. Yeah. Now, the introverts will love the alone study time. Yeah, that's where they will thrive. That's where they'll really engage, right? The extroverts will have to push through that because it's not their norm, right? But you can't engage in the last session, which really will be where the extroverts will thrive, that group discussion, unless you've done the study on your own time. And
that's right.
But it's the reality, right? And so that's why I'm saying a lot of the different ways that people are grouped and things that differentiate us and make us part of the unique people that God makes us to be, there's different parts of the way that this is laid out that ticks all of these boxes. And there's bits of it that some people are going to get more used to than others. The extroverts need to get used to spending quiet time with God. It's scriptural. It can't all be loud screaming, shouting, and everything else. Hopefully, though, that the way the group discussions, and this will really be the key of the coaches and good facilitators, because the word facilitator comes around obviously from the word facilitate, which is to make it easy, right? That's effectively what a facilitator is. You're there to make it easy for people to go on this journey. You're there to make it easy for people to learn. And in this last group session, when people come back together, there will be a key that is all about making sure that the introverts in the room have an equal opportunity to express what God's been saying to them. Okay? So yes, and again, that's important because you need a safe space where introverts can learn to express what God is saying to them, because introverts will sit in the corner really quiet without saying a word, given every opportunity to do so. And so that's on the coaches and the facilitators to actually draw everybody into the conversation in a way that they're comfortable with, right? We should all be comfortable talking about God and talking with God.
Yeah, and if you have a look at and that's a good point there, Bobby, not so much in this leaders manual, but when you look at the module 1 and 2, the group discussion in the coaches, there's a very clear, every week it's got the guidelines how to facilitate that group. So it's written in there. And just for exactly what you want is that the extroverts will take over the conversation and the introverts will, sit back and not do it, so that have we succeeded in those instructions there at the back of the coach's manual of each topic? When you've read that as a coach, do you think we've successfully outlined that for someone to facilitate that meeting in what you've read?
Look, I think, let's be honest, when it comes to that kind of thing, there's only so much of that you can succeed in through writing it in a manual.
That's right.
If the coaches, the facilitators of each session are conscious going into each session that that's something they've got to do, and let's be honest, the more you do it, the easier it gets. Right. So it is something that will become easier. It's something that you almost need to, as you go through this, like everybody when they're starting something out. Get out there, try it, start engaging people, but take a time when you've finished your session to go, what did I do well? What can I improve on? And think, did everybody in the group actually participate? If they didn't, then there's an opportunity to either follow up with those who didn't and just have a chat and say, look, did you not want to? Was there not an opportunity? What's the reason you didn't participate? And be conscious of that, because typically introverts won't jump forward and they won't be bursting, and they'll quite happily leave the room having not participated and be quite comfortable with the fact they managed to say nothing throughout a whole meeting. But you still want to encourage them to participate. Okay. So yeah, look, I think the manuals call out that that's something that needs to be done, but it's something that it's going to be, when it comes to the actual sessions being run, that's when the rubber will hit the road, and the facilitators themselves have to then come to a place where they will understand what it is like to do this. And I hope that many of them have done something along these lines in the past before.
It's a bit like learning to ride a bike. You can study all the manuals, but it won't happen until you actually get on the bike and start actually putting it into practice, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And perfect practice makes perfect. All right. So what about the personal discovery, sign off, etc.? We've talked about that. What's your viewpoint of that? Or have you understood?
Yeah, so and this comes back. So the personal discovery review is effectively guided questions which allow the coach to have key prompts to maneuver the group through a thorough review of their study. Yeah. Now there's two sides to this, right? One, if people come into a group knowing that everything that they were supposed to commit to studying is going to be reviewed, they're more likely to go through it and study it.
Yeah.
Right. But two, it's a good way for the coach to know that they've got a guide that will help them constructively go through, asking good questions. I encourage you, if you're engaging the group and you're having a conversation, feel free to add additional questions based on what the group is discussing. But you do have a guide that will help you maneuver through. Encourage every one of the participants. There's kind of an aha or I don't understand page, which is effectively a blank line page in every section, right? But encourage them as they come through things and things come up for them to note them in there at that time. Okay. The reason I say that is if you try and come back after the fact, typically you've forgotten what you were being prompted or what you were being told. And so I think it's a good idea that do it as, it's a bit like journaling, right? You've got to do it on a regular basis because you can't go back and journal for 3 weeks ago. Yeah, because you can't remember what you were thinking or what frame you were in or exactly what was going on for you at that time.
Yeah. And the personal discovery sign off.
Yes. So this is each coach as a coach. When at the end of every session, you will be expected to put your pen to paper and sign off that indeed that student did complete that session and what date they completed that session on. Yeah. This allows them to have a formal tracking of it. It means that if they miss a session or for whatever reason, that if you can either arrange a one-on-one with them to take them through it and catch them up, or you can, like Carl and I have done, we've done some of our sessions remotely and we've taken note of the dates that we did things on, and then Carl signed them when we've met face to face, or indeed they can link into a session where that's run in the future and get that signed off. Yeah. But it's a way of formally acknowledging, yes, they've gone through this, they've done it, and everything's in order.
Yeah. And so
it keeps everybody accountable.
For those that are listening, this is the Disciples Manual, and this is what Bob is referring to. The personal discovery sign off is in their own particular manual. It's not a separate sheet, it's in their manual.
Yeah.
And so the effectiveness of that, so what's the other part of that personal discovery sign off? There's another component to it.
Well, yeah, look, I mean, it's because they will build up over time, because at the end of every book, you'll effectively get a certificate of completion, right? There we go. Very good. And so the weekly sign-offs, or however, if you're doing it fortnightly or whatever you're doing, I wouldn't recommend doing it any more than fortnightly. It would become too far between kind of sessions, but I understand depending on people's people's schedules. There's people that are fly in, fly out. There's all these different things that go on that people will have to figure out the schedule that works best for them. But
Yeah.
try and maintain a regular rhythm. But yeah, the sign-offs at every session build towards that tick off where you get the certificate of completion at the end, and you can sign off and say, yes, I've completed all this sessions, I've completed this book, I've done that study, I've actually engaged. And yeah, I mean, that sense of completion, it's like a small reward, if you like, an acknowledgement of the effort that you've put in, which, as we begin on any journey, is a good way. It's a good point of recognition that says, yes, I'm moving forward in this journey, and I am, yeah, going in the right direction.
Yeah. It became a very powerful tool in that. Like if someone hasn't filled in the study, which we alluded to earlier, is that it clearly identifies it.
Yeah.
And it helps, and what you say, it helps them keep accountable to it. And we've found that in as groups that we trialed it in the early days, is that you did identify the people that hadn't filled it in. And then if it continued to repeat itself, you identified the issue and then sat down and did one-on-ones with them. But also the privilege, it is the small rewards, and it is the fact that, here it is, grown-up adults queuing up to have their book signed so they could get the certificate of recognition at the end. And, it's what you're talking about in our society of today. Recognition is one of those things that's missing. And God is a God that we know is a loving God and loves his kids. And this is a way of recognizing it. That's a funny way of saying it, but I think it's godly in the sense of, well, put it this way, that's the word. We're honoring the people for what they've done and they've achieved.
Absolutely. And look, and there's just that little bit of recognition and reward. It's something as simple as somebody coming in and signing off, yes, you've done it, well done, effectively, is often something that will give people the boost to keep going.
Yeah, that's right.
And it may seem like a really simple, silly thing, but make the effort, because it makes people acknowledge that, one, they were seen, that they were acknowledged, that this was indeed something that was, yeah, they're making progress, and keep going. So it's just part of the encouragement, exhortation, if you want to use a biblical word. It's a kind of physical exhortation of people that becomes a reminder for them that they're making progress and they keep going.
Yeah. Now, in the other part of it there, do you want to, on page 7, there's a summary, course summary there, because we didn't cover one of the things, the time frames of what this is. We alluded to the fact that it can be in any time frame, any location, but if we drill it down, do you want to recap that course summary of what it says on page 7?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, the different groups will decide for themselves certain aspects of this, right? So this is a recommendation, because this kind of framework works and typically will give people enough time without being too onerous. Pardon me. So when you come together, Alpha have been doing this very well for years in the way that they do it, but it's well known. Let's be honest, read the Bible at all about Jesus with his disciples, and you don't read very far before you find them sitting down to eat somewhere. Okay, that eating together is well recognized, that it will help people engage with one another. Now, just on a little side, there's a really interesting psychological aspect to when we come to eat together. The more formal the meal, the more reserved the conversation. Okay, so interestingly enough, if we end up using our hands as part of eating, we're more likely to engage other people more openly. So whatever you're doing, we talk about either sharing a meal or whatever else, coming together, depending on when you time your sessions to happen. You might have morning tea, you might have You might have an evening meal. You might have lunch together or something like that. You may organize that people bring their own food and you all just eat together in a communal space. You could arrange that you provide it. There's a number of ways of doing that, but that coming together and sitting around and actually eating together is a really good way of people just building fellowship, building relationship, which is really, really important, because building a foundation of trust amongst the people will make them more inclined to engage and ask questions and actually share what God's saying to them as they go on this journey, which is really the outcome that you want to occur. So in that, you've got that sharing a meal together. In the manual, it talks about 45 to 60 minutes, which gives everybody enough time to come in, have something to eat, chat a bit, get into there, and then have a quick clear up. Then you go through the personal discovery review. Now, this is like we just talked about, those questions that you ask and things. This is working through the questions on the previous session. Obviously, in the first session, it's going to be an introduction to the whole program rather than a review. But in every other session, it will be a review of the previous session, working through those questions, having a bit of a conversation. And that could be, well, we suggest anywhere 25 to 30 minutes in that space. Then you've got the sign off. Now you can do the sign off in the middle of the meeting, or you can do it at the end of the meeting. That's entirely up to you where you do it, but just make sure you do it for every session that's been complete. And then you move into the verbal presentation. As I said, you can either read from the coach's manual and present this yourself to the group, or you can jump into YouTube and play one of the videos that's available where Carl will take you through the actual session being read. And that's about 25 to 35 minutes typically for those sessions. And then the next bit is the bit where everybody can effectively go home and do the next bit over the course of the period between the meetings if they want, or you can arrange for them to stay and do that. I suggest it's best for people to go and do this on their own, because it's that personal engagement with the Bible, the study, the prayer, and everything else. And depending on the people, so the amount of time the personal discovery session takes is dependent on each individual. It depends how much time they spend praying or working through the bits and pieces, and how fast a reader they may or may not be. So it could take anywhere between 50 and 90 minutes. But as I say, because of the way the manuals are laid out, and all of the manuals come with these yellow tabs, so effectively people can mark their place any point in time and come back to it and do those sessions in chunks if they have to throughout the time between the various meetings.
Yeah. And what we did, Bobby, we carefully timed them. There's an estimated time of the Bible study, or the study time. And as you say, you know, typically from 60 to 90 minutes. But we listened to people and timed it with the average reader. That's where it is. The average reader will easily do it within that time. Of course, there's as you're well aware of, there's optional reading. They can read more. And we had and so we had one guy. He wasn't working at the time, because we'll tie this in with this as well. The Bible we use is a study Bible, and we taught them how to navigate his way around that. He came back to the meeting and talked about he just spent 5 or 6 hours in the Bible that particular day, and he was glowing. So we've set it up as, you know, 60 to 90 minutes, but you can read more out the way we've designed it. So tell me about your understanding of us, the Bible we've chosen, why we've chosen that, because this is an interesting topic.
Yeah, look, so the Bible, it's up here behind me. Get your weightlifting practice in. This one, the New King Jimmy version, and effectively, the reason it's been chosen is it's a good study Bible. It contains lots of interconnected references, lots of content that just tells you more in depth about the scriptures you're reading. It also includes sections like word wealth and a number of other little bits and pieces as it goes through, which allow you to dig deeper and further into all the bits and pieces of the Bible. So you're not just reading the words, you're actually going, okay, so what did this mean? What was the context of that, behind that? What does that word actually mean that was used? Because let's be honest, the English language can be described as being quite poor because we use multiple different words to mean the same thing in different context, or we use the same word to mean multiple different things depending on the context. And so it can be quite confusing, but the original Hebrew and Greek words that were used were very specific. They had tense, they had gender, they had all these different associations around those words. And understanding some of that can help point us to a more accurate understanding of what is being described in the Bible.
There's one major factor, one major thing that you've missed is that every Bible verse and every reference is page numbered.
Yep.
And the reason for that, I apologize, I'm not trying to trip you up on that, but all of the things you said are reasons why we've chose that particular study Bible. It's probably one of the best on the marketplace, and they've literally sold millions and millions of copies of it. But the one thing it's like for Karen and I, we came from a totally unchurched background. So if you said John 10:10 or John 3:16, that meant absolutely nothing to us. And so we really struggle with that concept. So one of the foundations a lot of times new Christians will be embarrassed and won't, they just shut down because they don't want to expose and feel like a dummy. So every Bible reference or anything to all of the study notes, everything is page numbered. A major key. It's a stumbling block in the sense that you can only do this course using that Bible.
Yep.
But as feature-wise, we had to make some, key driver objectives at the start. And one of the things that we had to choose a really good study Bible that was balanced and theologically strong and balanced across all the different viewpoints, but
Yep.
also the fact that we could page number it so they could feel comfortable. If they can read, they can look up a page number, and that's where they initially start. So
and that's that's really helpful as you're working through that. All the page number references are there in the guides as you go through.
And for you and me and a lot of Christians, they already understand a lot of the basics, but the target audience, which I alluded to at the start, is this coming harvest. We need to disciple them. They will need good discipling because they've got to have their worldview changed to a biblical worldview. And that's a massive transformation for many people. They'll be convicted of their sin, but they'll be like, where do we start? And that was like for Karen and I back in 1990. Where do we start with this? And so all of those things. But Bobby, I really appreciate your feedback on that. That's fantastic. As a coach yourself, it means we've ticked a lot of boxes in what we want to achieve. So I really appreciate that. Anything else you want to add for this session?
No, I think that's good. I mean, for all the coaches that are wanting to get, and I think where this is good is you don't need to be some vastly experienced facilitator to be able to navigate a group comfortably. The instructions, the bits and pieces are all here in the manuals. It's simply a case of following them. And as you grow in confidence with navigating the groups, you can begin to harness and take those groups and develop them even further.
Excellent. Well, that concludes this session. Next week's topic that we'll be talking about, let me just have a look at my notes here. Next week, the session that we're covering, have I got the page here? I've changed the page. I think next week we're going further into this topic. Sorry, I apologize. I haven't got it here, but it's on your sheet there anyway, on your run sheet. So thanks everybody for listening, and until next time, catch you later. Bye.